Hey guys, we are looking at Emily Dickinson's poems Because I Could Not Stop for Death and Some Keep the Sabbath Going to Church. I'm just going to do some quick annotating to go over some of the stuff that you need for your assignment. So, the first poem reads, Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice and the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised, and the horses' heads were toward eternity. All right, so the first thing that we're going to look at here is structure. And so, if we take a look, we have death does not rhyme very well with ourselves. There is some repeating, though, of that kind of ah sound. Me and immortality. Haste does not rhyme with to. Away does rhyme with civility. So it looks like we don't have a very regular pattern of rhyme here. So why don't we take a look at the syllables? So we're going to count the syllables. Because I could not stop for death. So there are 8 syllables in this. He kindly stopped for me, and 6 in this one. And the carriage held but just ourselves, 8 and 6. So one of the things that we do notice is the number of syllables are equal. So the syllables in the first line and the syllables in the third line are 8, and the second and fourth are 6. All right. We do have some slant rhyme throughout a little bit. We have kind of repeated sounds, but I like me and immortality, away and civility. But it does not appear, we've got ground and ground, yet and heads, they're similar, but they're not an exact rhyme, and day and eternity. So the rhyming is kind of off and on. Some of it is slant rhyme and some of it is true rhyme. So we're looking at structure and rhyme. And then let's move on and talk a little bit about word choice and imagery. So we're going to look for things for word choice. We're looking at diction that kind of helps contribute to a tone and a mood. And so that word kindly is kind of interesting. She's talking about meeting with death. And so the word kindly is kind of a spin on that. She's in a carriage. Maybe he knew no haste. She talks about labor and civility and leisure. See some pretty cool words here. Quivering, that's a good poetry word. All right, why don't we take a look at some of the images, and in doing that, we can talk a little bit about what she's talking about also. So in this, she personifies death as a carriage driver. There's a really cool, huge Halloween decoration in Home Depot right now, and it's maybe a horse drawing, like pulling. It's all very dark and Halloweeny, but it kind of reminds me of this poem, except that the mood of this poem is not quite as dark as, a spooky Halloween decoration. So she's describing Death as a carriage driver who kindly stopped for her, and it was just her and the carriage driver in immortality traveling in the carriage. He drives slowly, he's not in any hurry. And she says she puts away her work and her leisure too for his civility. So she puts everything away and just essentially pays attention to him. He becomes her focus. Speaking of focus, here we go. And then she talks about the images that she sees as she's traveling, and they go by a school and there are children. She talks about going by fields of gazing grain, a setting sun. When you talk about sunset, sunset is kind of a common symbol of the end of a person's life. So she says that they passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us. So the setting sun passed over her because they're moving so slowly. We have a lot of personification in this because the sun is also being personified. And it's when the dew falls, it makes her cold because she's wearing a very light, like a dressing gown or a sleeping gown. And then she says they paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. So that would be a gravesite. And the cornice and the roof, that would be a gravestone. Then she says it's been centuries, but it's gone by really quickly since she first had this experience. So while this is about kind of a dark topic, her non-traditional spin makes it not seem nearly as dark as it might be in a different poet's hands. She seems pretty happy and content to be doing what she's doing. So the last thing we're going to talk about is style. And if you notice, there are just a couple things like the word carriage and the word ourselves and immortality. We have just kind of random words that are capitalized for emphasis, part of her style. And we see these dashes. She uses a lot of dashes for pauses, also part of her style. There is some formality to her writing. It's not as informal as maybe Whitman, but it's definitely not as formal as maybe Anne Bradstreet. All right, so we're going to take a look at the short one here. So Sabbath, this is when you go to church. And in this one, she describes church as being as though she's in nature. So she says, some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. Some keep the Sabbath in supplice. I just wear my wings. And instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. God preaches, a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long. So instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. All right. And so she's talking about, and being kind of one with nature is one of the themes that we've seen throughout these bright romantic poets. And so we see that also reflected in this poem. I had to look up that word supplice or surplice. It is a tunic of white linen or cotton fabric reaching to the knees with wider, moderately wide sleeves. So it's kind of a tunic that, here, I'll show you. There you go. Surplice. So here are our pictures. of what she's talking about here. I'll give you a little bit of context. All right, so she says, let's first look at our structure. So we have home, rhyming with dome, wings and sings, long and along. But when we look at these are all not exact rhymes, but we do have some onomatopoeia where we have some repeated vowel sounds instead of actually rhyming. So that kind of sound in church and chorister, supplice, church, the sound, and then clergyman and last. All right. So it's not a strict rhyming structure. We do have some slant rhymes and some onomatopoeia here, and then we have more traditional rhymes here. But it's kind of an A-B structure. That ballad structure that you learned about makes it sound kind of like a song. So if we look at our syllables, some keep the Sabbath going to church. Let me double check it. I got 9. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. All right. I keep it staying at home with a bow link for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. All right, so bobolink is a bird. The birds are singing. The orchard above is the so-called church's dome. As far as structure is concerned, we have the same kind of thing where we have equal numbers of syllables. Let's see what else we need to take a look at. We talked a little bit about the rhyme. If we look at word choice and imagery, the whole thing is a metaphor, and she speaks of the outdoors as being her church. So instead of going into a building for church on Sunday, she goes outside. And so she paints these images, as I said, of a bird singing as someone singing in a choir. The orchard would be like the ceiling, the domed ceiling. Some wear robes. I just wear my wings. That's kind of an interesting word choice there when we talk about word choice. And instead of the tolling of the bell, our little sexton sings. And let me see, I think we're talking again about listening to birds sing. And a sexton, it's a religious term, meaning a person who looks after a church in a courtyard. Sometimes they act as the bell ringer. So we have, I think, probably a metaphor for birds singing as being a sexton. God is her clergyman, her preacher. The sermon is short. And so she feels that instead of waiting to go to heaven, she likes being where she is enough that she feels like she's in heaven when she's outdoors. All right, so what is true about both of these poems? They definitely explore common topics in creative and untraditional ways. We would not say that they're in free verse and never rhyme because there is some rhyme. They say that the divine could be found in nature. We don't have as much about nature in the first poem, so why don't we take a look? So I think that the only thing that we... Okay. See if we're missing anything. Yep. So the only thing that we see as being in both poems is that they explore common topics in traditional and uncommon ways. All right. So I think you have all the information that you need in order to complete the form that you're going to fill out. And so let me see if I can switch our camera here. Nope. I don't think that I can. All right. Well, when you take a look at your assignment, you're filling out a chart, and the information that we've gone over is really just the information that you need to put in the chart. And let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to help.